Okay. Like the previous speech, I did not write this, it was sent to me, and I'm discovering it along with you, so please be patient, and I will try and go slowly for you all, okay? This speech is on China's high-tech war on its Muslim community, and it shall begin now. The Uyghurs are Turkic-speaking Muslims from the Central Asian region. The largest population live in China's autonomous Xinjiang region in the country's northwest. The Uyghurs are one of a number of persecuted Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, including the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kyrgyz, and Hui. My apologies, I don't know if I pronounced those correctly. The region's name suggests that the Uyghurs have autonomy and self-governance. But similar to Tibet, Xinjiang is a tightly controlled region in China. Many Uyghur communities also live in countries neighbouring China, such as Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. An estimated 3,000 Uyghurs live in Australia. The People's Republic of China annexed Xinjiang in 1949. At this time, it was estimated that the Uyghur numbered around 76% of the region's population. Han Chinese, the country's majority ethnic group, accounted for just 6.2% at that time, with other minority groups making up the remaining total. Since 1949, Han migration to the region has diluted the ethnic ratio. Official statistics show the population is now made up of 42% Uyghur and 40% Han. Beijing does not recognise the region as a colony, but the 1949 annexation represents colonisation to Xinjiang's Muslim minorities, and segments of the population have resisted Beijing's rule. Many refuse to speak Mandarin, while others campaign for independence. Beijing regards any discontent or criticism of the Chinese Communist Party to be threatening. Minority dissent is treated as a danger to state security. This is even if it involves moderate voices calling for improvements in health, education, and employment. To Beijing, territorial integrity is of utmost importance. It does not tolerate any expression contrary to the official position that Xinjiang has always been part of China. Beijing has long considered Xinjiang and the Muslim minorities, such as the Uyghurs, to be backward. During the Communist Party's Great Leap Forward, specifically between 1958 and 1962, ethnicity and religion were signalled out as both obstacles to progress and backwards custom. Brutal crackdowns in the 1980s and 90s led to significant numbers of Uyghurs fleeing China to seek asylum. Repeated attempts at rapid and forced assimilation, discriminatory and oppressive policies, and a cycle of what commentators have labelled repression, have led to periodic protests across Xinjiang. In extreme cases, acts of terrorism, such as the Kunming train station attack, have been carried out both inside Xinjiang and in other parts of China. In recent decades, Beijing has recast the Uyghur ethnic group as a terrorist collective. This has allowed Beijing to justify its transformation of Xinjiang into a surveillance state. There has also been a marked rise of Islamophobia across China. Some Uyghurs have been employed by the state to spy on other Uyghurs. reporting any suspicious or illegal behaviour. This includes if someone has given up smoking, refuses to drink alcohol, or even if a Uyghur refuses to watch Chinese news broadcasts. Recent reports have identified more than 100 Uyghur intellectuals, including writers, poets, journalists, and university professors, are now among those who are most detained. The persecution of intellectuals who speak out against oppression and continue traditional practice occurs even if they are moderate in their views and working towards reconciliation. China's President Xi Jinping has overseen a hardline approach towards Muslim minorities living in Xinjiang, especially the Uyghurs. In recent years, the government has installed sophisticated surveillance technologies across the region. In Xinjiang, the web of surveillance reaches from cameras on buildings to chips inside mobile phone devices. Face scanners and biometric checkpoints track their movements almost everywhere. Other programs scan Uyghurs' digital communications, looking for suspect patterns, and flagging religious speech, or even a lack of fervour in using Mandarin. Deep learning systems search in real time through video feeds, capturing millions of faces, building an archive that can supposedly help identify suspicious behaviour in order to predict who will become an unsafe actor. Actions that can trigger these computer vision technologies include dressing in an Islamic fashion and failing to attend nationalistic flag-raising ceremonies. All of these technological systems are brought together in the LGOP, which is constantly learning from the behaviours of the Uyghurs it watches. In mid-2017, Alim, a Uyghur man in his 20s, returned to China from studying abroad. As soon as he landed back in the country, he was pulled off the plane by police officers. He was told his trip abroad meant that he was now under suspicion of being unsafe. The police administered what they called a health check, which involved collecting several types of biometric data, including DNA, blood type, fingerprints, voice recordings, and face scans. A process that all adults in the Uyghur Autonomous Region of Xinjiang in northwest China are expected to undergo. After his health check, Alim, this man, was transported to one of the hundreds of detention centres that dot northwest China. These centres have become an important part of what Xi Jinping's government calls the People's War on Terror. A campaign launched in the year 2014, which focuses on Xinjiang, a region with a population of roughly 25 million people, just under half of whom are Uyghur Muslims, was launched. As part of this campaign, the Chinese government has come to treat almost all expressions of Uyghur Islamic faith as signs of potential religious extremism and ethnic separatism. Since 2017 alone, more than 1 million Turkic Muslims, including Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others, have moved through detention centres. At the detention centre, this man, Alim, was deprived of sleep, of food, and was subjected to hours of interrogation and verbal abuse. He said, and I quote, "I was so weakened through this process that at one point during my interrogation, I began to laugh hysterically." He said when we spoke, that other detainees reported being placed in stressful positions, tortured with electric shocks, and kept in isolation for long periods. When this man, Alim, wasn't being interrogated, he was kept in a tiny cell with 20 other Uyghur men. Many of the detainees have been arrested for having supposedly committed religious and political transgressions through social media apps or on their smartphones. Uyghurs are required to produce their smartphones at checkpoints around Xinjiang at any given point. Although there was often no real evidence of a crime according to any legal standard, the digital footprint of an authorised Islamic practice or even a connection to someone who had committed one of these vague violations was enough to land Uyghurs in a detention centre. The mere fact of having a family member abroad or of travelling outside China, as Alim had often done, or as Alim had done in this case, often resulted in detention. Most Uyghurs in the detention centres are on their way to serving long prison sentences or to indefinite captivity in a growing network of internment camps. The Chinese state has described these facilities as facilities for transformation through education. These camps, which function as medium security prisons and in some cases forced labour factories, attempt to train Uyghurs to disavow their Islamic identity and embrace the secular principles of the Chinese state. They forbid the use of the Uyghur language and instead offer drills in Mandarin, the language of China's Han majority. Only a handful of detainees who are not Chinese citizens have been fully released from this re-education system. Alim, this man, was relatively lucky. He was let out after only 2 weeks. He later learned that a relative had intervened in his case. But a few weeks later, when he went to meet a friend for lunch at a mall in his home city, he had another shock. At a security checkpoint at the entrance to the mall, Alim scanned the photo on his government-issued identification card and presented himself before a security camera equipped with facial recognition software. An alarm sounded. The security guards let him pass, but within a few minutes he was approached by police officers, who then took him into custody. Alim learned that he had been placed on a blacklist that was maintained by the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, which is a regional data system that uses artificial intelligence to monitor the countless checkpoints in and around Xinjiang's cities. Any attempt to enter public institutions such as hospitals, banks, parks or shopping centres, or to cross beyond the boundaries of his local precinct would trigger this system to alert the police. The system had profiled him and predicted that he was a potential terrorist. The response from the international community throughout this period was notably muted, including recently, as more evidence of grave abuses has emerged. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, merely raised the plight of Muslims living in Xinjiang with the Chinese President in April, to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which openly condemned China for providing care to its Muslim citizens in March. Now, states need to be reminded that China is not the immovable object that many make it out to be. Chinese leaders have shown themselves remarkably sensitive to criticism. Xinjiang is geographically important to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a development strategy involving infrastructure and investments in Europe, Asia and Africa. This could provide an avenue for the international community to apply diplomatic pressure in the way of sanctions. Another option is suspension of or withdrawal from existing Belt and Road agreements. And, my dear colleagues, I can see you're all suffering quite a bit, and this speech looks like it's going to go on for a little bit longer, so I shall end it there.